Chris, thanks for doing this. Just by way of some background, and in order to keep everyone informed, you have the great privilege and honor of being married to my favorite child. So that's one of the ways we are connected. Another way is that our firm is working for an organization that you serve on the board of.
Yep.
So I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know your schedule is pretty crazy. Why don't you start off by giving me your elevator speech about, you can talk about yourself, your company. I would just be curious as to, just for the benefit of those that are watching this, so they get a sense of who you are.
Yeah, I normally don't talk about myself. I like talking about things that I'm involved with, and my kids and my wife, because I feel like what ends up defining me are those organizations that I'm involved with, either professionally or philanthropically. But I mean, just to jump in, I have been married and part of the Rotolo family for 10 years now, and it's been awesome to be part of that family. It's a total extension of my family, which is great. And I think what's been so great about it is not only the support and love that we all share, but the fact that you and I can have conversations like this on a pretty basis. And it's about business, and it's about philanthropy, and it's about organizations that we're involved with, whether that's clients of yours or institutions that I have the privilege of being involved with, and talk about how we can ultimately help them and make them better. And that's a lot of fun to do, because it comes naturally in the conversations that you and I have, and it's not something that's ever forced. It just sort of happens.
And we're gonna talk about some of your philanthropic interests. But tell me about your company. I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, so I'm a partner at a private equity firm by the name of Freeman Spogli. Have been here for 15 years now. What we do is we work with companies and really management teams in consumer and distribution businesses that are looking to bring in a partner to really help them facilitate their next chapter of growth. And we work closely with those management teams. A lot of times, they're founder-owned or family-owned businesses that are looking for some outside strategic perspective, in addition to capital, to help them, accelerate, what already is good growth, but really to, step function change them to accelerate, the art of the possible. We often say, obviously, having good returns allows us to continue to do what we're doing, but we like to leave companies in better spots than they are when we make our ultimate investment in them, or initial investment in them. And if we can do that, and if we can grow these businesses and broaden the management teams and provide them with multiple opportunities post our involvement, we feel like we've done a really good thing.
And when you became involved in Colgate, I know you graduated from Colgate, but it seemed like you got involved in Colgate pretty soon after you graduated. And the reason I make that distinction is one of the things that institutions that we've worked with, educational institutions, whether they be colleges, universities, or even secondary schools, one of the things that they always wrestle with is that, at what point do you want to try to engage graduates who you think feel like they benefited directly from the experience and are doing things that are interesting and can contribute their time and their talent to the institution. So that is a backdrop. At what point did you get involved, and what was the motivating factor to get involved?
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a story here, but I think it all kind of intertwines nicely. So when I was actually a student, my junior and senior year, I was involved in a committee that was put together by the board of trustees that had four student representatives on it, and I was one of them. And during that period of time, I had incredible interactions with and access to the board on big strategic topics that the university was dealing with. And I remember during that period of time sitting there saying to myself, God, this is super interesting, right? We're talking about strategy. We're talking about, long-term perspective. We're talking about, making moves and making investments today that are going to have, long-term impacts on this institution. And it got me thinking about my own personal career. And I kind of said, well, I'm a history major. I think I want to go into finance when I graduate, but what I really want to do is to continue to participate in these strategic conversations. So how do I do that, right? How can I figure that out? Because that's not a major that you can pursue, right? It's more of an interest. And I think it's one of the things that's ultimately led me into private equity, is because as a private equity investor, you do have that impact on the businesses you work with. You sit on their boards, you talk to them about strategy. It's not unlike the public markets. Everything's not done on a quarterly basis. I mean, we take a real long-term perspective on these businesses, over a 4 to 6 to 10 year life cycle of our investment, and really work with them to do that. So that's ultimately how I got involved with what I do on a day-to-day basis. So rewind a little bit to your question, the fact that I was able to get involved quickly after graduating and be involved in various different capacities at Colgate was a little bit of I have to figure out a way to kind of give back to Colgate for helping me figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life, which I did. And I really viewed that experience junior and senior year as a defining factor in ultimately the career that I ended up pursuing. And to be able to volunteer, on multiple different levels with the, admissions office, with the advancement office, ultimately serving on the alumni council, being involved now with the board of trustees. I mean, it has evolved over time, but this idea of figuring out a way to give back to an institution through volunteering at a relatively early age, post graduating, was just really important to me because of all the stuff that institution had ultimately given me to set me up for what I wanted to do.
So you were in your 20s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is I think most alumni professionals, advancement professionals would see that as being very, very young to engage an alum. I mean, they wouldn't turn it down, but it's not. It's very atypical of the way it usually works. And obviously it was rewarding. It was. Talk to me about that. What do you think kept? I understand what got you to think about giving back and about the experience at Colgate, but what's kept you involved at Colgate?
100% the people that I've been able to interact with during this period of time that I've been able to volunteer for the school. One of the coolest things I think I've experienced is, you go to college and you have sort of your cohort, right? The people who were 3 years ahead of you when you were a freshman, and the people who are 3 years behind you when you're a senior, right? And that becomes your world, no matter what college or university you end up going to. But graduating and all of a sudden having interactions with multiple different generations of alumni who feel the same excitement and passion for a place is just a very cool and addictive thing to become a part of. And when I look at, I will always have an incredible group of friends that came out of that initial cohort of my collegiate experience and time at Colgate. But I think the friendships that I've made and the people that I've been able to interact with over multiple different generations are really what keeps it interesting and exciting, and has kept me wanting to be involved with the school. The other thing is, that's on the alumni side. There's also this opportunity to every single year interact with a new crop of students who matriculate at the university, and through work done on the alumni council, we really do try to spend a lot of time with them. It's a little bit harder in the current environment that we're in, but it's a really important part of our mission and what we ultimately do. And then there's the administrative piece of it, and we have an incredible person running the institution right now, in Brian Casey, who's been with us for about 4.5 years, and he has put forth an incredible team to support him, and they make it really fun to be a part of an organization that just feels like it has such great momentum, and is really playing for the long game. I mean, we just eclipsed our 200th year about a year ago, so we're into our 3rd century right now. And to think about being involved in this institution that's already 200 years old and has such a steeped history, but has so much more excitement to give over its next century. I mean, it's awesome.
Human nature makes us all think about and worry about ourselves. I mean, it's just initially first we worry about ourselves, our family, etc. When the pandemic hit, at what point did Colgate kind of enter into your consciousness, and not only when, but also why? At that point, were you on the board? I know by fact that you were head of the Alumni Association, you have a board seat, right?
So I sit ex officio on the board right now through being president of the alumni councils. And I would say, I feel so fortunate that, when the world fell apart in the middle of March, Tara and my kids, Nora, Tucker, and Alice, we felt like we were really safe and in a good place. And I know that there were challenges associated with remote learning and trying to figure out how that all worked. But we did feel very fortunate that from a safety standpoint, we felt like we were secure. And I think what that allowed me to do pretty quickly was to focus on 2 buckets. One was the work bucket, because being involved in the capacity that I am with so many of these companies, they were trying to react and pivot their business models to contend with what was going on with the pandemic. So a lot of conversations, and as I said, we invest in consumer businesses. So those are restaurant companies that have, frontline workers that are, trying to stay open. They're, urgent care professionals that are trying to figure out, one, not only how to stay safe, but 2, how to come in and now, test a population that is looking to be tested. So my focus kind of shifted to them very quickly, because there were moment by moment decisions that needed to be made in late March and early April that I think really set, the companies that I'm involved with up for, success throughout this entire, weird environment that we're living in right now. So that was kind of bucket number 1. Bucket 2 was, organizations that I was involved with that were also feeling, pressure, and whether that, was Colgate or Brooklyn Jesuit Prep. I mean, these are academic institutions that, told their students they couldn't be in person, right? And whether that's university students moving off campus or middle school kids now trying to, conduct schoolwork remotely in settings that we didn't have perspective for. We are fortunate to live in this situation where Wi-Fi is so readily available and internet access is so readily available, but that doesn't mean that everybody has access to that or has access to technology. And it was one of the things that we really dealt with specifically at Brooklyn Jesuit Prep, because we happen to serve a population of families that are at or below the poverty line. So pulling up your laptop or iPad just didn't really exist for them. And, at Colgate, we sent, kids home to communities where, maybe it's a rural community and Wi-Fi didn't exist in the same capacity that it does in like a New York City. So there was a lot of reaction that had to happen and a lot of time that was ultimately spent. And that is sort of the immediate and doesn't even take into account that next step, which is just, the fiduciary and fiscal responsibility of how do you get through all of this? How do you figure out, with these pivots, come expenses, and trying to preserve capital and trying to make sure, the decisions we're making today, sustain these organizations, whether they're businesses or institutions, for a longer period of time. And, again, as I said, I felt fortunate because my family was in a really good spot, but there was a lot going on, in both those other two buckets to try to, figure out how to make sure everybody got through this okay, and continues to get through it today. I mean, it just, the conversations I've had both, professionally and through volunteer work about various types of COVID tests that you can get. Rapid tests, PCR tests, saliva tests. I mean, what's the best for our population? How often do we test? It's just, it's amazing. But you find yourself really responsible for both your employees on one hand, and then, those who are involved with you, whether they're students, faculty, administrators on the other hand.
Yeah, it never dawned on me, listening to you talk about the kinds of businesses. So you can put Colgate and Brooklyn Jesuit Prep in one bucket, but then you've got these companies that you have gotten to know on kind of on a personal level, even though they're business relationships, and they were struggling, as so many people have been struggling, with the pandemic, whether it be restaurants or bars or people in healthcare. But you had both sides of it, and probably there was as much, business judgment that you had to bring, along with compassion. Understanding the devastation that was potentially happening to these businesses.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we had, and look, March and April feels like 10 years ago right now, based on where we are. And I feel like that's probably the case for many people that you work with on a day in and day out basis. But, going back to those conversations, making decisions about, stuff that was going to impact and affect immediately groups of employee populations in order to sustain the overall enterprise, because we didn't know what the long-term outcome or how long, things were going to sustain. I mean, that was a tough place to be in. And I think the fact that, we're fortunate that all of our companies were able to pivot and weather the storm. And, we work with management teams who are truly incredible, for them to do things like take immediate pay reductions so that they could ensure that salary weekly payrolls were being met for the balance of their, staff. I mean, stuff like that was happening left and right. And we're in such a better place today than we were, back then. But it's a lot of intense conversations that really all focused around individuals, those people that you're supporting through your organization, and making sure, one, that they're healthy and safe, but two, that we can figure out a way to sustain them longer term.
Yeah. Just another question about going back to Colgate, and maybe even transitioning it a little bit to Brooklyn Jesuit. When you were being asked to provide input, advice, to either the president at Colgate or the president at BJP, talk about how you felt they used your talent. Was it satisfactory that you thought you were being used appropriately?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wear different hats at those different institutions, right? So when I think about what was going on at Colgate at the time, I very much had an alumni hat on, and trying to figure out, ways in which we could continue to engage 35,000 people, to keep them updated and apprised of the situation that was going on campus, to make them feel like they were engaged in that conversation, was critically important. When we think about BJP, which, the hat there is in a chair capacity, and we're thinking more about students, how we educate them remotely, faculty, how we support the faculty to educate them remotely, general safety across all of our populations. I mean, there's just a lot of other things that ultimately come into play. Ironically, there's a lot of themes that run through all different types of organizations that are consistent and similar, right? The health and wellness piece of it, whether you're one of our portfolio companies or Brooklyn Jesuit Prep or Colgate, I mean, that was paramount, right? So if I found out something from one of our restaurant concepts that I thought might be helpful to BJP, sharing best practices across the board there, why not, right? Those organizations may never, have come together otherwise, but if something's working at one spot, you might as well offer it up, as advice or suggestions at another spot. So I think, to be honest, just being engaged in different conversations with different organizations during that period of time was helpful, because you were finding best practices, even in sort of the darkest days, that could ultimately be shared and collaborated, despite not having a common link amongst them.
Yeah, I don't think many people were in a situation where, their professional work and their philanthropic activities kind of coalesced the way it seems like yours did. So that's very interesting. As you know, a lot of people who might be watching this, there'll be, people in your world, people in Rotolo Associates world. So many of them have an interest and are always learning about philanthropy and how the pandemic impacted philanthropy, and even thinking about our clients, each one was different. We had to deal with them from the point that they were at, their reality. We had to deal with their reality. Anything that you think either you learned and you want to share or talk about relative to that?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, I think both institutions appreciated the level of sensitivity that had to happen, in the spring and summer of last year. I mean, the world, I hate using this, but the world was sort of falling apart, and there was no real light at the end of the tunnel. And as I said before, I think that has improved a lot. On the campaign planning side of it, I mean, the reason why organizations have campaigns is to support those institutions for the foreseeable future, right? It's to raise capital dollars, and whether that's, building projects or financial aid or academic pursuits, all of those are important to the vibrancy of these organizations at the end of the day. I'll talk a little bit about BJP just because, I think about what a school that's a small school with very limited resources was able to do through this period of time. You look at where we were in March, on the cusp of trying to launch a capital campaign that was really going to set us up for the future. And you look at where we are today, in a 8 to 9 month period of time, they were able to pivot their entire curriculum online and teach our students remotely. We had already decided that we were moving the physical space that we were in because we were renovating a new physical space, and contending with that construction, throughout the pandemic, has been interesting, but they were able to do it. They then had to work all summer to think through reopening plans so that we could bring our students back onto our new campus, safely. And on top of that, we had to figure out a way to fund it. So you kind of put that all in the blender, and you sit there and say, for a school like BJP, small school, limited resources, but they're able to corral, whether it's their existing team or volunteers to get this done. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And the fact that, even in this current school year, we've had fits and starts. We had to open late because of New York State. We were open for a couple of weeks. We got shut down because of clusters that were popping up in Brooklyn. We're now open back up again. And through it, this school is figuring out a way to, sustain itself and survive is pretty awesome. And I think it actually gives the campaign in that specific situation so much more energy and momentum, because we're proving out to people day in and day out what we can do with resources, once we ultimately have them.
Yeah. How did Colgate bring you in, bring other trustees in to the decision-making process? Was there good and constant communication between yourself and the president?
What I would say is, and I would say this across the board, whether it be Colgate or BJP or any of the professional things that I work on. I mean, there wasn't a week that went by that there wasn't some type of Zoom related communication that was happening, and then a lot of side conversations. But look, the goal at the end of the day when you're going through a crisis like this is thought and transparency, right? You want to be thoughtful about the actions that you're taking and then ultimately be transparent about them. And I think the more people you can get involved in the transparency piece so that people feel like they have a vested interest and understand why certain decisions are being made, I think it ultimately helps you get through some of these trickier points.
Yeah. You obviously are busy. You have a lot on your plate. When you were approached by I guess was it a Jesuit that approached you to first become involved in BJP?
So it all ties itself back. I got approached to become involved in BJP because one of my teammates on the Colgate swim team, her dad was involved in Brooklyn Jesuit Prep. And I've known Katie and her parents for 20 years now, and Kevin, her dad, is in my industry in terms of he has worked for companies that we would invest in, right? Not on the private equity side, but on our ultimate, the types of companies we target. And Kevin and I were having lunch just to talk about consumer and retail and the industry and what was going on. And somehow the fact that I went to Fordham Prep came up, and we started talking about the Jesuits, and he started to talk a little bit more about BJP and the good work that they were doing there, as he was on the board at the time. And one thing kind of led to another, and that was 4 years ago. And it's been awesome to be involved. And you want to talk about the growth that a school has had in such a short period of time. If we had to put an IRR on it from a financial standpoint, it's incredible. I mean, investment has been made in, but the return on that investment is awesome, and it comes from the people that have been involved with the school, but also what we're doing on a day in and day out basis, which is educating these middle school students and seeing the successes that they're having, not only in high school but beyond.
Yeah, we're close to wrapping it up, and I'm just curious about a couple of things. I did watch the piece that your president did at Colgate on the way the school was dealing with the pandemic, and I was impressed with it. I guess it got some national attention from CBS.
Yeah.
And Brian does seem to be an extraordinary guy in so many ways. Have you ever thought about your philosophy about leadership? How you try to lead, again, from a business standpoint, from a family standpoint, from a a nonprofit standpoint. What thoughts do you have about
Yeah,
that?
it's interesting because there is a common theme, whether it's business or nonprofit. I mean, and it seems so simple, but it is so important. I mean, the person and the team that you ultimately have to back to lead your organization. I mean, that's where it starts and stops. And you know, we have consistently found that in our investing. When we back great management teams, we end up having really great investments. I've seen it play out at Colgate through Brian Casey and the team that he's put in place, the administrative team that he's had at Colgate. I mean, I think the world of Brian, and he has been such a welcomed addition to that community. And I think the reason why the school is where it is today is because of Brian and the team that he's assembled. And the same holds true for Brooklyn Jesuit Prep. I mean, we brought on Mario Powell about a year and a half ago, and similarly, I mean, he has just been an incredible addition to the school, and has started to develop a team around him that I think is going to take the school to the next level. So I feel fortunate in that, I get to sit back in some ways and watch great leaders and all the organizations that I'm involved with do what they do. And, what I can offer is just help and support. Right. And I love playing that supporting role. I joke, or others here joke, that I spend more time on the phone than anybody else at the firm, because I'm on the phone all day. But it's just checking in with people, and it's checking in with the CEOs that I have the privilege of working with every day. It's checking in with the teams up at Colgate and at BJP and within other organizations that I'm involved with. I mean, the world revolves around people, and these organizations revolve around people, and having great people lead them is, I think, what ultimately makes them so successful.
Yeah. Well, you I know you by nature you're very modest, but I think obviously you've accomplished a tremendous amount. The very fact that you're in the position you're in at Colgate at this point in your life is, I think, a testament to the leadership that people have observed about you. Kiss the kids for me.
I will.
And thanks for doing this, Chris. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. This has been fun, and I'll see you this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care.
Okay.